Hello, Insights. Welcome to another episode of Inside with Justin G. Cobb. I am truly excited for this. And before we begin, I wanted to first thank you all and also remind you, ask you that if you value what it is that we are doing, if you appreciate the power of grassroots storytelling, if you are living for this content, be sure to give it a like, follow, subscribe, and don't forget to share it with your peers. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Insight. I'm your host, Justin Cobb. This is a Small Seeds and Media production. And today I have a wonderful guest there. Before we continue, I want to first, we're going to do something a little different on Insight. I'm going to leave a little land acknowledgement here for us. Today, this is known as Virginia, but this territory that I'm standing on right now in particular has been disputed between the 7 different tribes, some of them of which I am struggling with pronunciation. And rather than do them the dishonor of mispronunciating their names, I will just say those 7 tribes here in Virginia who made this their home at some point or another. There, we see you, we recognize you, just as we see all the indigenous peoples around the globe. They're Today's guest is Dr. Stephanie Littlehawk Big Crow. She is a Lakota Indigenous woman. She is a cultural expert. She is an orator, a storyteller, and I am so grateful that she is on the show today. There, Dr. Littlehawk Big Crow, Stephanie, thank you for coming on.
Good morning, Justin. Thank you for having me on.
Yes. So I know I mentioned that you were cultural experts, Indigenous, and all these other things, but what more would you like for audiences to know about you and your work before we continue? Brought to you by Cham Cham. Each one an expedition in flavor. It brings zest, it brings zing, and is rooted in culture and connection and community. What are you waiting for? The audience is tuning in to get a special 10% discount code INSIGHT at checkout with their online purchase. Experience the flavor.
Well, first of all, let me introduce myself in our language. So, Ambetu Ashte, Stephanie Ohitika, we Chetan Chinkala na Kangitanka, Tiosh by Metawaki, Oglala Lakota Titua. Ochati Shakoi Imataha, Wakbamani District, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, Altipi, na Guadalupe, Arizona, na Alatipi. Greetings. Thank you again. My name is Stephanie Littlehawk Big Crow. I am Oglala Lakota, originally from Wakbamani District on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I currently live between Guadalupe, Arizona, which is the Yaqui village of the Ueme, the Pasco Yaqui tribe here in Arizona. But I'm originally from the district of Wakbamani, which is a village east of Pine Ridge, which is located on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Most people know us as either Tituma or Oglala, Lakota, or in the most I wouldn't use the term, but most people know us as Sioux, but which is a very derogatory term used to identify the Lakota.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so many terms, and I know that language is a key indicator. We talk about how language is something that is currently being reclaimed in a lot of Indigenous circles, whether it's through relearning the languages that you all spoke before colonization, or whether it's really helping people understand that there is legacy behind words, and not all of the words that were used to describe an Indigenous person have always been the most flattering terms, to say the least. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, Stephanie. Are you ready to travel back in time with me? We're going to go back a little bit and we're going to learn more about what it was like for you growing up. I want you, if you're open to sharing with audiences, what that was like for you.
Yes, please, let's do.
All right. So what was it like for you growing up? I know you told me your story, but I want audiences to hear this as well.
Well, it was definitely interesting. So let me just set the platform. I'm 46 years old and I have been off our reservation for 15 years. I did grow up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and I was raised in the country. That has always been, and I don't know if I described it to you at one point, Justin, as a double-edged sword. So yeah, so growing up in the rural area on the second largest Indian reservation in the United States, it was a double-edged sword because one, I was privileged, and at the time I didn't know, because my father, a single father, had chosen and asked my maternal grandmother to help raise me and my older sister. And so when that occurred, we really didn't know. We just thought we were Laura Ingalls Wilder on Little House on the Prairie, because we were out in the country in an isolated area, but we had our language, we had our culture, we had our ethos, things that for us were normalized day to day. And so having that background of being raised around my culture, my people, our lands, it really solidified who I was. But I didn't recognize that until later on in life, until I got much older, not realizing it would be the very saving grace to lead me to my academic adventures, my life experiences, and to really give me that boost in the Western world. And it did prepare me and help to, I think, guide me spiritually. And so I didn't navigate off this path and end up disrespecting this life. So it was a very different upbringing. It's very hard to explain, but it is very unique. And when they say, I guess the one thing I can say is, I don't know if you've ever heard that term, that it takes a tribe.
It takes a tribe. Yeah, it's something similar. I've heard it along the lines of like it takes a village.
Yes, that's exactly true. Because when I look at the context of how I was raised, it literally took a village to raise me. And at the time, the social context and the social dynamics were so different than what they are today, because we didn't have technology. We barely had television stations. We had antennas that picked up local stations, but otherwise we were pretty secluded. And that worked to our benefit, I think, looking back, because it allowed us to not keep up with Western society's ideals of progress, because we didn't necessarily define progress in that same context. So having that ability to be removed from Western society, from this polarization, it really gave me the ability to maintain that direct connection to my people, my Tioshpae, my Oshpae, my land, our family, our land, and our culture. So it's a very unique upbringing.
Wow. And you talk about before how, so you have a more secluded childhood in the sense that you're not as connected to the outside world in terms of like technology and all those other things. But in a lot of ways, you're talking about how this is actually a blessing. Can you elaborate more on that for us?
Yeah, I think one of the great blessings for me is being able to see things in a multidimensional way. So one of the things that I didn't notice, honestly, until I got older, in fact, the last few years, I really start recognizing how different my mental model is compared to most people out here in the Western world. So when I say Western world, I mean off our reservation, out of our tribal lands, like here in Arizona, although I'm on the lands of the Apache Oyate, or Apache people. Things are very similar on reservations, and that goes across the board in the United States. There's so many similarities for tribal members who reside on tribal lands. It's extremely different. Because if you think about it, time didn't touch our tribal lands. I mean, systemically, the US government made sure that our lands were politically and systemically oppressed. And so we weren't afforded a lot of the opportunities to keep up, if you will, with modern society's ideals of progress. But how that played out for us was, one, we weren't being pressured by the outside world to keep up with technology, to bring in Wi-Fi, to I think the most we had is satellites, the big satellite dishes, those large ones that sat out in people's yards. Otherwise, technology didn't touch us. And because of that, I feel that there was no disruption. We were able to maintain those family ties, the communal ties. We still maintained that strong sense of communication. The social aspects of it were how we identify with each other as relatives. And then, of course, the virtues of how we enacted those virtues. So everything was pretty much untouched because we didn't have the external life of the Western society influencing us. We did, but to a degree. And of course, I'm 46, so growing up in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of technology. And because of that, I was able to interact with elders daily. My grandmother would take me down to certain areas on the reservation, whether it would be, it was an old tree behind a abandoned church where the elders would gather, and I would sit there and just listen to them speak an old dialect that's hardly spoken today, in fact. And during that time, it was all observation. So I learned a lot of those skill sets to be, observant, to be able to sit still within myself, to use those skills of observation and then listening. And I learned so much through the elders because they were talking about current events then that were impacting our people. And not only were they talking about current events then, they were talking and discussing the ripple effect of the current times and whether that be whether there was hardship coming on the people, or whether they were talking about the sense of our spirituality and their concern for how as a people we were able to sustain that. So their conversations weren't just about today's topics or what's going on in society. They were actually talking about things that were happening now and then trying to project right ahead of time, 7 generations ahead, to say, well, if we don't identify the ripple effect and the cause and effect of what and how today's challenges will impact us, then we know that they will more certainly impact the fate of the next 7 generations. So you can imagine, with those very detailed conversations, I picked up so much because I was continuously listening and observing. And because of that, the oral histories, the traditional aspects, the cultural ethos, it really gave me that very broad, very multidimensional way of viewing the world, viewing myself in context of my innate responsibilities. And that was something I definitely didn't learn in the Western world when I left home and came out here. It was really different.
There was 3 things that came up, and I feel like are some key highlights to what you just said. Were purpose, being like the last one you mentioned. You also talk about elders and ancestry, and you also talk about language. And all 3 of those things are key roles in shaping a person into who they are today. And you touched on this a little bit. There was a moment in time, you said, where you actually diverged from this and from what you were learning. Can you talk to us more about what catalyzed you to diverge from that? Hey, Insights, real quick. I have this amazing resource for you all. The Insight Prompt Pack, 20 prompts to build your platform, is now available for digital download on Gumroad. It is a carefully curated pack of 20 prompts that can be partnered with your favorite AI tools and can be used to not only clarify and share your story, but also give you some practical tools to build your time, build your schedule, and tailor this platform to the one that you need. It is available for $17. Link in the show notes. Be sure to check it out.
In fact, we're finding that so many Indigenous peoples who leave our homelands, in search for opportunity, often come to this fork in the road. And right now, let me back up. So one of the things that I realized when I left the reservation and just left those homelands is I didn't realize a lot of just society in general. And I'll just generalize it because it was very difficult for me to find someone that wasn't a linear thinker. So there was times that when I recognized the modern the general society didn't necessarily view the perspectives or view the ethos or the beliefs of Indigenous peoples in that same manner, I had to really desperately find a way to communicate because I didn't realize that they didn't recognize we were merely are human beings, right? Walking this earth journey, that it was a culture shock. Let me just put it that way. Having coming into the Western society, one, we leave our lands so we can learn. So I wanted to discover what systems are necessary and that need to be accessible for our people in order for our people to survive. So I had to come out and learn the different Western systems. So I went into social work, I went into healthcare, I went into education, I went into linguistics, I went into research. And studying those different fields, it was very convoluted for me because I recognized then that the Western world was very siloed and segregated. They didn't see things where, for example, academics, everything's siloed, even though everything is interrelated. And everything is, codependent on each other. In the Western world, they teach that everything is siloed and individual. Where in our world, we learn science through a universal perspective, through a multidimensional perspective. So we understand that the trees, are a part of this ecosystem. We understand that they are our relatives. They help to provide clean air, and vice versa. We are to nurture them. So therefore, we have that codependent relationship, that natural relationship with all living beings, human and non. So when I came out into the Western world, what I did was I set myself up essentially as I dove into Western academics, and I earned 7 degrees and I have one certification from Columbia. And it was baffling to me because I went home after all these years spent in education. And I asked my grandmother, my unchi, why? When I knew, or at least could understand through our language and our culture, the intersectionalities and the close relationships with all living elements, with the natural world, versus what I was taught in these Western academic institutions that really did a great job of teaching me how everything was separate and not interrelated. And so it was very confusing for me. But I didn't understand why I had to go through these whole systems of education, spend as much, invest as much as I did in my education, only to learn what I've already known, what I already knew in my language.
Wow. So and you're not the only Indigenous person who has pointed this out. So all these Indigenous scholars for generations have been pointing out what science now understands and how everything is connected. And we see it in all the latest reports. Anytime you hear anything about climate change, for instance, and the devastating ecological impacts that will come from continued human activity, the way things are going now. And this is something that Indigenous people have been warning the broader public for generations have been
Yeah.
completely sidelined and written off and told that you don't know what you're talking about, and you're just a native. What do you know? This, that, and a third. But really, it's like all this wisdom that was untapped isn't we're seeing it's now costing us for not listening. There,
Yeah.
wow.
That's very true. And it's interesting because many of our indigenous peoples, and this is one of the things. So my husband, he's Yavapai, Apache, and Paskoyaki. He's a retired medical doctor. He has his law degree. I believe he has about 7 degrees as well. Because he was raised in the urban area, and he was raised away from his lands, his traditional lands. He was assimilated into mainstream society at a young age. So he didn't have that upbringing like I did. One of the things that we recognize in the way that he thinks is it's almost a setback because he lacked that connection to his land, to his people, to the language, to the culture, to those, especially our ceremonies. That he didn't, it really impacted him mentally and physically, where he didn't understand, and one, who he was. He knew he was an enrolled tribal member, but he didn't understand what that really meant. So for him, just holding a tribal identity, he describes as very empty. And unfortunately, he ended up, living his life in certain ways that obviously we all make mistakes, but he always attributes that if he had known, more about who he was and had that solid upbringing, that he feels that he would have turned out different, which he recognizes in me, that I can go to any group of indigenous peoples, or I can travel into different indigenous lands, and I immediately will know how to connect with the people. But I told him, I said, it's because of the way I was raised. So when you're raised with your people, you're raised with your culture, you're raised with your lands, you're raised with your language, and that's all you know, you recognize that energy. And so regardless of where I go, I can blend in with the oldest of indigenous peoples. And our humors are identical. And it's almost unbelievable until you see it happen. And the one thing he says is that it's an innate connection. He said he can't explain it. He just sees, me being able to communicate and almost communicate non-verbally with a lot of our relatives, because we understand that mental model. We understand, and it's a lot of body language. It's a lot of high observation. That's what I really put it under, is you really learn to observe not only yourself, but to recognize your own existence in your space, but to recognize who is in your space around you. And it doesn't just stop with humans. I mean, we recognize all life, right? Human and non. And so we're taught to be very mindful and highly observant with our surroundings. And to me, that's played a huge pivotal role in my life in being able to acculturate successfully into the Western world without fully assimilating.
Wow. So, and a lot of this, what you're speaking to as well, this is, it's, we talk about that sense of identity, and with that identity comes like that sense of belonging and purpose. And it's the lack of it is not just evident in indigenous communities. There's a history for the reason why that happened, because of the forced removal, because of the attempted genocide, and some of the continuing efforts to do so in some respects. But then there's also, we see this in other cultures as well, here in the United States and even abroad. We witness it in Canada, for instance. We witness it in South Africa, among these other places, where people just feel as though they, like, it's not just the people who have been colonized, it's also the people who we're colonizing, who feel lost and out of touch with
Yeah.
everything. What has your knowledge and your experience really taught us about that sense of like identity, that sense of self? Because your background in social work definitely played a role in shedding some light on this.
Yeah, it was interesting to say the least. So one thing I didn't realize when I left my lands is observing, and I told my husband I probably should have been a sociologist, really. Is it because I came out just continuously observing my surroundings, taking notes. One of the things that I recognize is that sense of duality, the sense of identity. People who don't have that strong sense of identity or belonging, they struggle with trying to find themselves and sense of to understand who they are, where they belong, and their purpose. When I seen that in my husband, and I'm going to use him as an example, and he knows this, and we both will, talk and speak in public forums about how different we are, because we truly are the yin and the yang. Not only do we come from different tribes, I'm a northern tribe, so I'm from the Great Plains. His people are originally from the UMA villages in what is now Sonora, Mexico. He's also 27 years older than me. But we both age, well, for me, we don't recognize the physical age because I'm so much more advanced than him and just higher in my mental model because of the way I was raised. One of the things that I didn't realize, and this took me a while to observe, Western society, it was traumatizing at first, to say the least. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It was extremely traumatizing. When I came here, I immediately had my mind made up. I was going to finish my graduate degree and I was going to go home, and that was it. Well, I ended up marrying, and now I've been for the last 15 years traveling back and forth between Arizona and South Dakota. But what I noticed, and I think we had a brief conversation about this before in the past, is how I didn't understand how people didn't have an identity. And so when I ask someone, or vice versa, when someone asks me here in this world, and when I say this world, I mean, this Western world outside of my lands, they'll ask me, well, where are you from? In the general context, they're asking where I live. They're not really asking where I'm from, where my bloodlines originated from, or who I represent as a nation, as an Indigenous woman. Those are two different topics for us, because one is more, how would you say, superficial?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had to learn how to speak in a superficial context here because I didn't know exactly how deep that they could go. And then when I start asking, well, where are you from? And they would say, oh, I'm from Illinois, or I'm from Chicago, or wherever. And I would say, well, where are you really from? Unbeknownst to me, I didn't recognize they had no idea where they were from.
Mm.
And so one of the things I start looking at was, and of course we talk about DNA, right? And so I start looking at, well, everyone comes from somewhere. We
Mm-hmm.
don't just exist, merely to exist. And I would say, so I know for me, I've not ever taken a DNA test, nor will I. I won't sell my DNA to Ancestry or 23andMe. But I do know that my non-Indigenous DNA, I'm hoping, I have two strong suspicions that my grandfather's bloodline comes from my maternal grandfather comes from either Ireland or Polish. And so, and I jokingly say, well, I'm Lakota, but I also acknowledge that I have UMA in me. Some of our relatives, there are Indigenous peoples were nomadic pre-contact. So we didn't just stay idle and landlocked like we do today. And so we traveled and intermarried within nations. And so I always tell people, well, I claim Lakota, UMA, and once I find out if I'm Irish or Polish, then I would be honored to claim those bloodlines as well. And hopefully, who knows, one day perhaps go visit. Because I know for me, my grandmother would always tell me, well, it doesn't matter, what your your blood degree. That's a colonial concept. That's a attempt to assimilate and annihilate a nation. She would remind me that it's up to you and what you believe you are. And so she would say, claim one or claim them all. It's entirely up to you.
For all those allies and accomplices, this one is for you. I know a lot of you are working on some beautiful work out here, and you want to share it. And I also know that creating that content can be treacherous. You are almost done with those drafts, and you're just at that point where you really need to bring it to finish, and you can't bring yourself to do it. Well, I'm offering 5 spots at $175 for 90 minutes each to support you in developing a strategy and clarifying that draft and bringing it into a publishable piece. Be sure to check me out. You can schedule your sessions now, or if you want to hear a clarity call to refine what it is that you need and how I can support you, be sure to do that. All of those links in the show notes. Check it out. Absolutely. And I want to lay down some context for folks who are tuning in. What we're speaking about here is essentially what is called the blood quantum. And the blood quantum was in the legal codes of the United States. So this is from back when colonialism was still in the cauldron, and it was spewing and sputtering and like really taking shape and form. They drafted these laws saying that in order for you to be considered indigenous, you had to have a specific amount of quote unquote indigenous blood in order to be considered a native of the land. And if you didn't have that, then it was a way to justify taking or putting you into a different category. Whether it was white, they would just shuffle you in and assimilate you into white culture, or if you had, and this happens in a lot of indigenous communities too, because a lot of them had contact with Black African people who were brought in to the Americas. Some of them were also relegated into that category as well, and they were denied their native lineage because of this association with Blackness too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of what you're seeing, like what you're talking about, is that continued legacy of the blood quantum.
It is, and it's a very colonial ideal where it was done basically to segregate, manipulate, and eventually annihilate. Mm-hmm. And so in the United States, there's only 3 entities that require a blood degree, pedigree, if you will, and that's horses, dogs, and natives, Indians. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that what tribes are trying to do today, and not all tribes go on blood quantum, they do open it up to lineage, but it is a very politically sensitive topic, especially because some tribes are getting their entire identity removed. They're in those that are not federally and state recognized. And that really causes a lot of long-term damage to a lot of those tribes and tribal members. And then if you can imagine, that creates a domino effect for future unborn generations.
What are some of the key lessons that you've been taking away from your work?
Well, most of my work is actually in intellectual property rights of the Oceti Sakowin, which is the 7 council fires. I try to really look at legal protections of cultural ethos, cultural heritage, folklore, languages, anything tangible and intangible as viable economic assets to reduce government dependency and convert back to what I've titled a Tatanka circular economy. The one thing I noticed immediately leaving my reserve and my lands is the desperation for identity and connection here in the Western world. And so through my work, I really take a lot of those traditional teachings of Wohpe, and I integrate them into whether it's healthcare, whether it's intellectual property law, whether it's language revitalization, or just sharing and teaching cultural, traditional, what we call biodiversity, our plant-based medicines. So working in all those fields, I'm a natural educator, first of all. I consider myself an unchi. I'm a grandmother of 6, and it's been the biggest blessing for me to be able to teach my grandchildren our language, their identity, their way of life, and raising them. Being that first grandparent, we are their first educator, if you will. So we believe in teaching them our language and teaching them the universal view of the world through our lens, through Wola Kota or La Kowi Choa, rather than teaching them through a assimilated world. And that's so now learning that as a grandmother, I will say it helped me to design culturally sensitive webinars and create spaces where we can invite all of our relatives globally to join us and bring it back to that shared sense of that. I don't know if it would be a shared sense of belonging, but to share our cultural teachings with those who may not have an identity, in hopes of providing some spiritual guidance to help alleviate a lot of that emptiness that we find here in this world. I don't know how to, there's a word for it, and I just had it last night, but in essence, sharing who we are as a people in hopes to reteach others that their place of belonging is within themselves, and how we can unite using these very simple but yet humble universal laws.
Yes, a lot of what you're talking about is I hear a lot of self-actualization, but I also hear a lot of like reclamation, like and coming back into yourself. And this is the one thing that in many circles, and speaking as someone who has conducted this work in terms of understanding like equity and diversity and inclusion and belonging and the whole alphabet soup that we got going on in here, because there's a lot of them, but a lot of what you're talking about is like that belonging, in the sense that it's not just about physically, like in terms of like your community or in a workplace, but it's also in your state of mind and in your greater sense of self, because that's where a lot of misalignment takes place. It's not just because it's not just about like companies and cultures, but it's also about, do I feel confident in who I am as a person and what I'm able to contribute in this space, in this time.
Yes. And that's, one of the things that we're seeing today has probably been the most profound learned lesson for all of us. Is there were several years back, I was traveling with a group of elders, because I can translate our language really well. And we noticed these children, and we noticed that their intellect was these were children all younger than, maybe 5 years and younger. We start noticing their level of intellect, meaning that in our beliefs, we know that when our newborn babies, our newborns come into, unchimaka, through the womb of their human mother, that they still remain connected to the wichachbi oyate, to the ancestors in the spirit world. So we know when they venture here into Mother Earth, through the womb of their human mother, that they still have that connection. And that's why it's important for us to sustain our language. We speak to them in our language when they come out. I do the wiping of the mouth. It's one of our birthing ceremonies, where I take a piece of sage, and I actually have some here. And I'll just hold it up. So we take some of our sage, and this grows wild on the plains. And there's different types of sage that are used interchangeably within Indigenous peoples. But our particular sage is different. Well, of course, molecularly different, but we take the female sage and we will wipe the mouth of the Wakanja. During that time, we speak to them in Lakota and we guide their spirit. We tell them who they are, who they're born for, who they're born to, and their purpose here while living this human life on Unchimaka. Then we start to notice between the ages of 2.5, 3 years old, they start to develop their human subconsciousness. And for us, it's really interesting to see that because we're as grandmothers, as a Unchi, that's how you say grandmother in Lakota, I observe them. So I get to see their personalities form, their mental models, their insight, their intellect. What we're seeing now, and this is a prophecy that many Indigenous people share. And because of my work, I've had the great privilege of traveling and working with, most recently, the Hopi. And I was up in Second Mesa. I was visiting with this Unchi. She was a grandmother. She was, I want to say, about 91 or 92 years old.
Oh, wow.
And we sat there and it was the most, and so this is where my husband will sit, because I'll drive us and she'll take me around the land. She'll point out significance. She'll point out different plants, what they're used for, the different, for medicinal purposes and how they're used in their culture and their ceremonies. But one of the things that I really ask elders, regardless of what nation they're from, I really, because of my work with Indigenous peoples, and I start noticing these young ones coming in earlier, and they're coming in super advanced. Their intellect is far more greater than I've ever seen. So when I was talking with this Hopi elder, I had asked her, and of course I don't speak Hopi, so the way that we speak to each other, you wouldn't say broken English because there's really no such thing, and we don't speak proper English because it would be the Queen's English. But there's certain words that we use and even hand gestures. And I was trying to ask her if she recognized and seen in the spiritual intellect of these younger children. And she was telling me, yeah, she said, but I thought it was because of technology. And I said, well, some of it can be attributed to technology. But I said, did you notice their intellect? And she goes, yeah. And I said, did you notice they're coming in all colors of the rainbow? And she agreed with me. And I said, these are blonde hair, blue-eyed, red hair, black hair, curly hair, brown hair. They are all colors of skin. I said, but they're coming in whole, where their subconsciousness is so developed that they just don't have the physiological aspects and the muscular developed enough to speak. And I said, if they, these are ancient ones reborn. And so what was interesting about this was for the last probably, and I know I spoke with you about it before in one of our conversations, but I've been noticing this trend for about 3 to 5 years. And I've been watching. So as I've been working with Indigenous elders, and I'm looking at all of these children and all these youth, and I'm just studying them, and I'm thinking, wow, you're an old soul reborn. And when I start speaking with the elders, they all agree with me. And so the last one, which again was up in Hopi, and it was just this Unchi. And so I asked her, I said, one of our prophecies speaks about this this generation that will rise, and they will come in with the force of wotakuye, this force of energy, that their intellect, their spiritual intellect, and their energy will be greater than what we've ever seen before. And she said, yeah. And I said, do the Hopi have similar stories? And she said, yes, that's what I'm seeing too. So many of the elders, because we talk about this, and many of them look at me because one, they just can't believe I'm a grandmother of 6. I said, yes, if I feel like I'm 80 years old, honestly, but because I was raised with the elders, my mental model is a lot more advanced and mature for my age. Well, speaking with the elders, I've been privy to speak with elders from Hopi, Navajo, Yavapai Apache, San Carlos Apache, the Anasazi, the Onondagans, the Iroquois, many of the indigenous peoples, not only in North America, but up in Canada, our relatives in Alaska to the Yukon, and we're all seeing the same trends. And so what that means is that everything that we've always known as indigenous peoples and where we're at today, when we see climate change, we see the devastating impact of climate change to human life. We know that these younger generations, they're coming in for this purpose to rebuild and redirect this nation, this Unchimaka, the Mother Earth, if you will. And for us, we didn't believe that we would be living during this day and age to see this roll out before our eyes.
That's a powerful. And one of the things that resonates with me too is the fact that this energy that you're speaking of, it's not just embedded in one particular category of people.
Yes.
You talk about how it's like all these multiple different like categories of people who are coming in with this wisdom and with this knowledge. And that gives me hope because it means like, hey, like it's not just one particular group of people that is here to do this work. It's something that we all can participate in. And I feel like that's something that needs to be talked about as well, is that this work, it may look different depending on like your particular historical context, your particular your particular regional context, etc. But it's essential going back to source, and it's about reconnecting with our humanity once more and reconnecting our relationship to Earth and the bigger picture. For those of us who are maybe coming outside of this from whether it's like a Lakota or even an indigenous context, what would you want audiences outside of those to understand, like their role in this?
Yeah, that's a big thing, is when I realized that not too many people outside of indigenous peoples recognize that they have an identity. But many of them, the identity is lost due to, decades and generations of just colonization. That one of the things my grandmother pointed out to me was we were sitting there one day and I said, Unchi, where are they from? Like, why is the non-indigenous, why do they lead with such egocentric, having to have more power, have more, glory, or they, everything that was ego driven. We couldn't understand why that was. And she told me, I don't know. I don't think they know who they are. So that really got me thinking, well, they're chasing after, titles and the American dream per se, because they really lost identity or lost that concept of who they are. So I start to think back to myself, and I was doing research on different cultures and different, ethnic groups historically around the globe. And I start realizing that that's who their ancestors were. And so when I start to speak with non-natives, I'll say, well, where's your ancestry from? And again, if it's Polish or if it's Irish, I mean, of course, my favorite, just because I find the cultures fascinating, I start recognizing, well, hey, you come from different peoples too, because around the globe in every continent, there were ancient peoples who spoke ancient languages, who had ancient ways of doing things. Those are your ancestors. And that's where I went back to, it doesn't matter if you want to claim one or all. It's up to you to determine who you are. And when I recognized that it was just helping to fill in that little gap for a lot of our non-Indigenous relatives, I would tell them, well, don't you realize you're just you're a spiritual being living a human life, that you're only supposed to be here on Mother Earth for our Unchimaka for that minute second in time. And where we go from here, we transition into different worlds and different universes. That in our ways, we believe that we're merely stardust made flesh. And we can break it down to atoms and molecules and everything of who we are and our humanness. But when that nahi, nasicha, the spirit is what we call the soul of the umbilical cord. When our spirit or our soul leaves us, then it's then that we transition back into the spirit world. But while we're here on Mother Earth, we are all connected to all of our living beings. It is us who have forgotten, as in our human life, those vital connections to the natural world and our universe. So we're trained here in Western society. Western society wants to train the mental model or the mind, the human mind, to think that they can only exist within these certain, boundaries. But for Indigenous peoples, we know that we're all coming in together, and as mankind, as humanity, it is all our collective responsibility to ensure that we take care of Mother Earth for all of our future great-great-grandchildren that are unborn, but most indefinitely rely on our ability to see the world in a humble manner and and respect this in the reciprocal relationship with each other in order for life to exist.
A lot of what you're talking about is growing and shedding away things that don't serve us and don't work for us, and embodying. And some would even argue it's a return to what we knew to be true in the past. That we're reaching a point where we are moving away from these old systems that are no longer serving us.
I think when what really hits home for me, I don't watch too much television. I keep up with what I need to, but I do focus most of my energy on prayer, just knowing the power of our natural energies, focusing on prayer and just that good positive energy. When I do read the news, and I do read I don't have social media, I have LinkedIn. But when I see the power of just good human beings, I will tell you, there's so many times when especially on Thursdays, I get on the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe radio station. And it's a group of elders from the Ocheti Shakowee. And we all openly talk and share about our traditions. So when we talk about the mass sense of humility that we're seeing displayed, in across the country, that how many countries understand the history, right, of this world. Many people are shedding those colonial constructs that were forced upon them, and they're starting to look at their life through the Indigenous lens. And we always say, well, it's not the Indigenous lens, because we're all Indigenous. Indigenous just means ancient DNA. And whether that DNA is from Scotland, or whether it's from the Great Plains, or whether it's from, our relatives in Latin America, that regardless, we all have that ancient DNA. And it's up to us to really tap into that and utilize that as a way to reconnect to our sense of self, our sense of purpose, and being strong in that sense of identity. Well, what we're seeing now is people are having this conscious awareness, this conscious awakening, and we're seeing one conscious nation rise to that momentum, and people understand, what's at stake. And so they're stepping into spaces that they would have never stepped in before, or would have never even considered embarking in these unknown spaces. That for us, when we see that sense of humility and bravery, we know that the world is waking, and we know their human subconsciousness is starting to return back to its original state, where their spirit is being called back, in essence. And that's a traditional teaching. And so we know, and it's very multidimensional, but for the viewers, we know, like if you take the medicine wheel, you have the 4 quadrants. And so we know when our Wakaija, our spiritual beings, enter into the womb of Mother Earth through the human mother, these are the 4 cycles of life. So you start off from your infancy to, young toddler, then you have your young adult, Hokshila, Wichinkala, then you go into elder or adulthood, young adolescent, adulthood, Wichasha, Wia, Na Unchi, Gakalala, Tonkashila, your elder state, and then you transition back into the spirit world when your life here on Mother Earth is journeyed. Most of the times when people come into Mother Earth in our spiritual teachings, if something traumatic happens from during pregnancy and or after these young spirits make their journey into the spirit world, if something traumatic happens to that young baby, that baby, that infant, and that young toddler, that and the young adolescent, anytime between these first two periods of life, that the body, the spirit will remove itself as a protective mechanism. And so every day we practice and many Indigenous peoples do, many peoples of color, when they wake and they pray in the morning, and then we pray at sunset. Those two times are very pivotal for us. So when we pray during that time, it's important that we remind ourselves to call back our spirit, because of what, this life here on Mother Earth can get quite cumbersome, and it can get difficult, where we know it can impact the spiritual being. So what we're seeing today is the more that we share these traditional thinking, these traditional ways, we always remind people to call back your spirit. And if that means just to go outside and in the morning at sunrise, call your name in the four directions, Justin, 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 Justin. It means you're centering yourself. And when you center yourself in the morning, like I did this morning, and I'm actually facing the east, so I called my spirit back. And then at the end of the day, I'll do the same at sunset. And we believe in that because we know that as we travel throughout the day and as we meet new people, we're picking up different energy, and it can cause our energy to become unsettled or imbalance of some sort. So we know to call our spirit back at the end of the day so that our mind doesn't stay too convoluted and that we remain focused. And now we're noticing that many people are calling their spirits back, meaning this subconscious awareness is this awakening is happening before us. And the power that we're seeing out there, it's humbling. And for everyone that we see standing up and advocating in difficult times and difficult spaces, we are watching. We keep our prayers with you. We send prayers of protection over the world, and we pray for everyone at this time, because we know it's turbulent times right now. But that's what we're seeing, is everyone's waking up.
No better time than the present. I mean, maybe yesterday would have been good, but hey,
Yeah.
now it's as good as time as any.
Exactly. And the youth that are coming in, this what we call the rainbow generation, because there's no word in Lakota or in Hopi that defines that rainbow. So the only word we can find in English to describe the multitude of these beautiful little beings, that they are coming in blonde, blue-eyed, brown-eyed, hazel-eyed. I mean, they are amazing. And for us, that's a prayer come true, because we see their energy. And then with the subconscious awareness of the nation, like those are things that we've been long waiting for. It's for people to call back their spirit, to wake and rise above all, and to recognize that they're not just human beings, that they're spiritual beings born for a purpose, and that we're all finally realizing we are all born, to our mother, Mother Earth, to live collectively in unity for all living beings, not just the human, but so that all life can live and dwell in the manner that they wish. And it's unfortunate it has to happen in this way, but we really, as a Lakota woman, seeing it for myself and having conversations with elders, it is our hope and our prayers made flesh.
That's amazing. And I'm curious, Stephanie, because you're talking about this in a sense of unity, and the Lakota, like a lot of the people who are familiar with their stories and what was being taught to them, they know about how they're essentially their prophets foretold, their medicine folk foretold that it would be people from all the world, from all these different categories coming in.
Mhm.
And obviously, not every person may agree to this because every person has their own individual thoughts.
Mhm.
But the ones who see this, I feel like from an outsider looking in, the question is like, why would you want to work with us? Like after everything that happened, and what, especially those who have the history of the colonizing, like what, like how, why would you want to work with us after everything that has been done? Like, what words do you have to say in addressing that?
Yeah, good question. Actually, one of the things that I always teach, my grandchildren is that hurt people hurt people. And my grandmother used to say, when someone hurts you, forgive them, because someone hurt them. And when someone's hurt, they hurt others. And so for us, I've always been taught that why would I do unto you what was done to me or my people? That would be inhumane. And then that would make us no better than our oppressors. And I believe, and when I say we, because I do get the privilege of getting to work with a lot of our elders and just my family, my grandparents, my unchi, my gaka, that they teach me humility. And they always remind me that for our relatives across the nation, across the globe, that all of us have been born into our purpose in this way of life. Some of us who know, have that ability to walk forward in a strong way, but those that don't, guide them, teach them, because every human being deserves to live a good life here on Mother Earth, and everyone deserves to live a spiritually balanced life on Mother Earth. So we don't believe in doing what was done to us. It's unfathomable. I don't think we could ever be that to hurt another human life intentionally. We know that comes from a place of darkness, and I don't know of any human being that would want to live in that darkness. So
Wow, that's incredible. That's moving, and I feel like it's definitely a message that we all, regardless of our categories and labels and titles, could really take some wisdom from. There, this has been incredible, and I feel like I could probably film like several episodes just from gaining your insight and everything. It's been great. But Stephanie, for those audiences who would love to collaborate with you in the future, who would love to work with you at some point, what do you advise? What do you recommend? How do they do that?
one of the things I've been trying to identify, and so an organization that I'm with now, we're all female, we're all Lakota, Dakota elders. We're mothers, we're grandmothers. It's the Unchi, Wichoye, Aholki Papi, Wowashte, Wowachipi. We teach the Lakota and Dakota languages, and we teach them and we open the forum, so you don't have to be Indigenous to join. They are free. We believe that the more we share our language and share the teachings behind our language, because our language is a moving energy, it's descriptive. It's not like English, where English is very a property-based language. So we believe by teaching and opening spaces for non-Indigenous to come in and learn Indigenous languages, then you really start to see the world in a different context. And for me, I believe if any person who wants to grow in that space, then I usually invite them in to either learn, our language, or learn more how we can work together, learn more about each other, and to really align our efforts. Because essentially, we all want the same thing. We all want to live in a better world and preserve and protect Mother Earth for those future unborn generations, so that they may live rightfully so in a healthy world where they can breathe clean air, play in untainted grass, unpolluted, soils where they can, eat the vegetables from the earth and be able to drink from the streams once again. And I find that any human being that wants to live in that solitude, that sometimes they may have questions in how they join these circles, but we invite you in to join us in learning our language and then sharing your life and your diversity with us, because there's a lot that we need to learn as well. So I would start with just learning who we are and learning together collectively as relatives, and start from there.
That was such a beautiful conversation. I am so grateful to Dr. Stephanie Little Hawk Big Crow and for her appearance here on the show. She brought so many beautiful contributions on how belonging and acceptance can be fostered into economic development, and rooting ourselves not only in the power of culture and identity, but also in creating cross collaboration beyond our differences. It is so great. I'm gonna leave some more information about her in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. Thank you for tuning in to Insight It Means the World. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with those you love or people you think could really use some insights here today. Be sure to check back for more. Visit the archive if you haven't already, and stay tuned. There's more insight coming.